When the crew of SV Prism get hungry, they look upon Shannon for food. Here on Prism Cooks, Shannon shares her favorite boat recipes that are easy to make and yummy to eat.
Welcome to the first episode of Prism Cooks. We're going to start off today with one of my favorite recipes, which is English muffin bread. And what I love about this bread is that it's super easy to cook. There's no rising, punching. It only takes about an hour so the boat doesn't get super hot. And I probably make it every other day. So, the ingredients. You'll need flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, and yeast. You need to make sure that your yeast is really fresh. I keep mine in the fridge to keep it the freshest. You'll also need water and milk. If you don't have milk, you can use all water, but it tastes better with milk. So let's get started. I'm going to add half of the flour to begin with, which is a cup and a half, into the bowl. I don't do perfect measurements, which to me never has caused a problem, but I get pretty close. And before I go any further, I'm going to put the kettle on to warm up the water. With warm water, the yeast reacts a little bit faster and you get the nice big holes like in classic English muffins. So I have half the flour in. I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking powder. There we go. A teaspoon of salt. And I'm just using Kirkland brand sea salt. Nothing too special. I'm going to use a teaspoon and a half of sugar. Here's 1 and a half. It's kind of funny. I keep my sugar in a jar that's a little bit easier because in Central America, the only sugar you can buy is in like massive bags for the most part. And I found it funny that I looked at this today and I put it in a sugar-free jar. I thought it was ironic since it's sugar now. Anyways, and also 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. 1, 2, and a half. Once I have that all set, I'm going to let my water heat up a little bit, and I'm going to add it to cold milk, a cup of cold milk. And so that way it's just not too hot, not too cold, and the yeast will be nice and happy. Alright, I think my water is warm enough. So in a cup, I'm going to add my cup of cold milk. If you use both cold milk and cold water, the yeast will not be as happy. So I just heat up the water because it's always in a kettle and put it into a mixing cup or, a thermal cup. And then add a half a cup of my warmed water. If your water is too warm, then it will kill the yeast. So you want to make sure it doesn't get above 115 degrees. You don't want to kill your yeast, you just want to activate it. So once that's all good, I kind of stick my finger in it to make sure it's not too warm. It's perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and pour this into my flour mixture and stir it up. I'm going to want to make sure I stir it all the way till it's thoroughly mixed. Another great thing about this recipe is that there's no kneading. You don't have to take it out and knead it in flour. And the dough is actually much stickier and it looks kind of wet, which is kind of odd if you've never made bread before. You would think that it's going to be like pizza dough, but it's not. So I'm going to mix it up till it's thoroughly mixed, and then I'm going to add the remaining 1 cup of flour. So a total of 2.5 cups of flour for this recipe. I find that a big enough bowl and a big wooden spoon is your best friend. Not only for this recipe, but in bread recipes in general. A big, thick wooden spoon that you can really hold on to and mix the dough around is really helpful. Okay, so I'm going to add the other cup of flour. And I'm just going to gradually pour it in and mix as I go. So you don't want to just dump it all in there at once. So you want to make sure that you're adding and mixing thoroughly before each addition. This is when the big wooden spoon comes in handy. This is a really sticky dough, and you want to make sure you're getting everything off of the sides in a thorough mix. So with a big wooden spoon like this, you can really get in there and mix it. I remember the first time I made this recipe, I was really confused because the dough looks more like a stretchy cake batter type dough. And I thought I was doing something wrong, and I tried it anyways and it came out great. I'm gonna grab my bread pan and I'm gonna give it a quick spray down with cooking spray. If you have cornmeal, you can sprinkle the bottom of the pan with cornmeal. I don't have any, I've never used it, and I've never had a problem. But if you want that classic English muffin crisp, you can use it. So just sprinkle a little down there. And I'm gonna go ahead and pour my batter in as much as I can. Just push the dough around on the bottom of the pan so it's somewhat level, but I'm taking up the whole pan at the bottom of it. Now let it rise. Depending on the temperature of where you're cooking, it can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. About halfway between rising time, I turned the oven on. In classic ovens, the recipe calls for you to preheat your oven to 375 and then to bake the bread for 15 minutes. But if your galley oven is anything like mine, it's really more of a guess. Since I've made this so often, I basically just turned my oven up as warm as it gets. I do have a little thermometer in my oven that tells me, but I really don't think it's correct. So once it gets around 200 to 275, that's when I put the bread in. And in my oven, it only takes about 10 to 11 minutes to cook. So really, depending on your oven, just keep an eye on it. Luckily, the bread pretty much tells you when it's done. So you can see now that it has beautifully risen, and we are going to put it in the oven now. I put it on about the middle rack, slide it in, close the oven back up, and I will turn a timer on for about 11 minutes. I use my iPad, phone, watch, whatever you have, works fine. Just don't forget about it. So the timer is done. That was 11 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take a look to see how she looks, see if she's ready or not. She looks pretty golden. I'm gonna give it a light tap. It sounds hollow, that means it's done. So I'm gonna go ahead without burning myself, bring her on out. All right, so now that it's out, if you want a crispy crust, you gotta get it out of the pan to cool. So I'm gonna grab 2 classic butter knives, have them ready, and I'm going to flip this bread up and out. Now if you use cornmeal, this is when you'll have all that cornmeal on the bottom here. Hot pan out of the way, and I'm gonna stick the butter knives underneath the bread. It's hot, so try not to hold it for too long. I'm gonna let it cool, just like that. I let it cool for about 5-10 minutes, depending on how bad I want to eat it. When you cut into it, you should have nice big holes like classic English muffins. Yum. Alright, so we've let it cool, and now it's time to dig in. So, I got my handy dandy IKEA cheap bread knife. We're gonna go ahead and cut right into it. Oh yeah. Look at that. See those holes? Good yeast. This bread is delicious when toasted, so if you have a toaster oven or a grill, or if you toast on your stovetop, however you do it. With a little bit of butter on top, you swear that you're actually eating an English muffin. It's delicious. And another topper is that this bread will last in a Ziploc bag in your fridge for, it doesn't last that long for us because we eat it so fast, but it will last for up to 4 days in a Ziploc bag in your fridge. I haven't tested anything beyond that because we eat it. 1 piece for me, 1 piece for the cameraman. Oh, that's so good. That is some pretty good English muffin bread, if I say so myself. And if you want to try this recipe yourself, which I highly recommend you do because it is delicious, visit svprism.com and click on Prism Cooks for a full recipe and more. Until next time, fair winds and following seas.